One of the things I was thinking about was just the arc of your career. And it looks like sort of hit after hit, you've had, thankfully, knock on bamboo, a pretty successful career. And I know you're still pretty young, but when you think about the commonalities of people who've sustained success, I'm curious, what are 2 or 3 of those traits that come to mind?
I think the biggest thing that comes to mind is persistence. You hear about so many quote overnight successes. I remember my wife is not in tech. And when Airbnb, there was a point at which it became big and hit the public consciousness. She's like, this thing came out of nowhere. Wow, this thing is huge. Only to then learn that Brian and Joe and Nate spent years toiling, kind of wandering in the wilderness, and continuing to build brick by brick. And I think, that kind of grit and persistence underlies a lot of what I've seen, the people I've seen who have been successful. And my personal connection to this idea was, watching my dad. I grew up in the Bay Area, right? In the 80s and 90s, when there was a big kind of like Cambrian explosion of people building things and coming up with ideas and starting companies. And, my dad was an immigrant from India and kind of paid for his education by working at, a 7-Eleven at nighttime and eventually got an education, eventually got some jobs and so on. And then one day, quit his job and came home and told us, hey, I literally scrawled this thing on a napkin. I'm going to start a company with like 3 of my friends. And we didn't know that was a crazy thing to do. Actually, we realized it seems like a thing people do. Sure, whatever. And they didn't have any office space or funding, so they started the company in our garage when I was growing up. And I think for me, I got a firsthand sort of view into the endurance required to be an entrepreneur. They went from being excited and optimistic, we're going to change the world, to eventually being overwhelmed and, regretful. What the heck did we do? We quit our jobs. And eventually, again, brick by brick, hired some people in, got some picnic tables and laptops. It used to be they fit in one part of our garage and then they took over the whole thing. And then they, of course, eventually moved out and got a building and a campus of buildings. And they built a company that was worth, multiple billions of dollars. But for me, my lived experience was day to day. You had to, put in the work. And so that was a great introduction. I didn't glimpse people starting things first from headlines and the outcomes. I got to see it kind of from the bottom up.
What kind of company was it?
It was a hardware company, an optical networking switch. This is back in the 90s when, companies were still laying fiber and wiring, a lot of the country for internet. And it turned out, you had to take signal and split it a bunch of different ways. And a switch was an, pretty complicated thing. And if you could do it just purely optically with mirrors, that's a incrementally cheaper, faster, easier to maintain solution. And that was what they were after.
I wanted to ask about like things you've learned from your parents. You mentioned that experience. Was there a lesson from your mom or dad that kind of stands out when you think about just some of those lessons that you sort of remember in the back of your mind as you've kind of progressed in your career?
Totally. I grew up in a lot of ways in a traditional immigrant household. My parents were always pushing me to, academically succeed and to and to kind of have a picture in my head. That was kind of the overarching message my parents were trying to like kind of give to us as kids, was at least have a picture of where you want to be, at some point down the road, so that you could even pursue it. And so my dad used to say this thing to us all the time around the house, and we would like blow it away. I'm like, what are you talking about? And he would say something like, hey, Rishi, the plan is always useless, but planning isn't useless. And, he would say this all the time. And, in the world of starting companies, this resonates so deeply with me that, effectively what he was saying was fortune favors the prepared mind, right? And he's like, you're going to put this plan together. Let's say it's a 1-year, 2-year, 5-year, 10-year plan for your company. And like a quarter in, like you're going to discover, some customer segment works or doesn't work, whatever. And you're going to like completely depart from your plan. There's no way to predict the future. However, if you go through the process of creating a scaffolding and a framework for yourself of, okay, we want to do this and then that and then that. And when you get some new information, it's actually easier to assimilate that information once you sort of have this scaffolding in mind versus sort of feeling your way through the darkness like the whole time. And so that has totally stuck with me. The plan is always useless, but planning isn't useless. And I think anyone who works with me knows that is it very well describes how I work, because I am constantly trying to write things down and look forward and create a plan. And then, the plan is always out the window.
I love that. I think that's probably also one of the most under sort of thought of things is just preparation in general, right? Because part of that is preparation to get to that point. It's just one of those, there's this thought, I've kind of been asking people. I've asked this to Guy Raz, how I built this post. I've asked this to Coach K recently.
Yeah.
Is there such a thing? This wasn't in my questions, but since you brought it up, is there such a thing as over preparing? I know there's no right or wrong answer, but like when you think of that, what comes to mind?
Over preparing. Wow. I don't think I've ever seen over prepared. And so I think my answer is, practically speaking, no. I probably earlier I said persistence is the greatest thing that I've pattern recognized, but it's good practice. It's persistence and preparedness. For years, I played soccer growing up. I played soccer at a high level. Recently, maybe 10 years ago, I was like, I'm done with this sport. I want to pick up something new. I'm a big basketball fan. I started playing basketball. And at first, I'm getting to your question. At first, I was putting shots up all the time. And I was like, this seems good. And then I came to learn by spending a bunch of time reading books, talking to trainers and so on, that all shots aren't equal, right? You can actually groove bad behaviors. And so what you really need to do is practice with purpose. And so you need to, before you walk into the gym, have a sense for how many shots am I going to get up? And what am I trying to do when I take a shot? Am I trying to make every shot? I mean, it's probably practically impossible. Or am I trying to, get my arm angle up today? Is that what I'm going to focus on? Right. And there's practice with purpose. And I'm not a great basketball player. However, I can see my rate of improvement just absolutely skyrocketing when I go in with a plan every day, and then I go and put in the work. And it takes both of those things, persistence and preparedness. I don't think I've ever seen anybody who is over prepared, to answer your question.
All right. I think we can get along. We agree with that. I put a poll out. It's interesting to see. Again, there's no right or wrong answer, but I agree with you. And it's not about also showing that you're over prepared. It's about sort of being ready. I was talking to a friend of a friend, and it was a dad, and he was the father of a guy who played for the Packers for many years, won a Super Bowl, all that stuff. And the dad would go to the practices, and he told us a story about how he would be behind the chain link fence during practice, and the players would go through their motions like 1 inch at a time. Like, who does that? These are professional athletes, but they were literally going through the motions to anticipate, the movements and what could happen. So I love that you think like that.
Yeah. And I've heard a lot of athletes visualize, right? Like visualize getting into the end zone from a quarterback sneak or whatever. And again, it's just all of this kind of, I think comes back to fortune favors the prepared mind. Just having that grooved in your mind, I think allows you to react a little bit more nimbly when the real world comes and your battle plan meets the enemy, or whatever the saying is.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, I do want to touch base on some other amazing people that you've either got to work with or work for or work around. One of them being Max Levchin, a part of the PayPal mafia. I'm curious, what was it like working with him?
Max, if you've ever seen him on TV, is an incredibly intelligent and analytical mind. He's a really brilliant guy, is a different way to say that. And that is the lived experience too. There's not a behind the curtain, person who isn't all that he seems. He is a truly very fast mind and smart person. I think the thing that Max taught me, showed me, was this kind of old adage or something that you'll hear a lot, which is, the team you build is the company you build. And like specifically, just if you've ever watched Max's career and seen what happened, he's basically worked with ambitious people and invested in all of them. That was kind of just generally, I think, what he's done over the course of his career. And the people that he worked with to, talked about the original kind of like the beginning of his notoriety was at PayPal. Folks at PayPal went on to start, innumerable interesting companies. And then, he and I worked together, a company called Sly that was acquired by Google. And those, many of those folks went on to start Square and Affirm and Open Door and, and so on, other wonderful companies. And I think I was lucky early on to just kind of encounter someone like that who said, it's a small world out there. It's an especially small world in the world of tech and business. You're going to see all of these people multiple times. Find the smartest people you can, most ambitious, optimistic people you can, and then invest in all of them. And but what he means by that is invest your time, work with some of them, invest your dollars when you're capable of doing that. But like reciprocate and spend time and break down their problems and be generous with your brain power sometimes. And it all kind of comes back, to pay off in the end.
I heard you say something maybe similar in a previous interview. Like, and I think the question was around like, what's the best career advice you can give? And you said, get around the smartest people and make yourself indispensable, which I mean, you said a part of, and it made me think of, so like Keith Rabois, it made me think of something he said, this is like 5-6 years ago, but he said, don't be good at what you do, be the best at what you do. I was like, all right, like that's instilled in my head, right? Like, how do you separate yourself? And it made me think of that word indispensable, right? I think it's so important.
Yeah, it's something I tell all my team members. At this point, I've hired, hundreds, thousands of people. And if you can't imagine, being in an organization, whether it's a team or a company, and making yourself in some regard indispensable to the team, is this really like the right play? Like if you think of yourself as a replacement level sort of person, maybe you haven't found your zone of genius or the right fit or the right people or the right community. And it may not be that you're indispensable in that the whole team falls apart if you don't show up. You might be a role player, but you might take that role and like understand it really well and be really indispensable to the overall, box score, to the team. And that's, I think, I'm not sure anyone told me that. I learned that, working for Keith and Max at a, fast-paced company, and we grew to tens and hundreds of millions of customers. And, basically what I learned was raise your hand as much as you can. And if you get your spheres of influence, if you nail your core job, raise your hand and try for that next sphere and so on. And being indispensable is quite a feeling, you feel on the hook, which is, sometimes can be pressure, but you also feel like you can drive outcomes, which is, very empowering. And so with it, comes a lot of interesting experiences.
Sounds like don't be minimum viable. Like, don't just show up and just do the minimum work, right? Is there a trait that you look for at Future when you think about all the people that you've hired or your managers have hired? Is there a trait where you tell them like, look, this is something we can't teach, and we need to look for this. We need to optimize for this in the interview process?
Yeah. There's a few, what I would say, like two that come to mind that we really think about looking for in people versus teaching people. We teach a lot of things to our teammates, are optimism and attention to detail. And attention to detail is something that actually everybody has in different parts of their life. Some people are super particular about like how their desk is like organized, and other people are super particular about the way their to-do list is, iterated out. And what we look for in people who we think will be successful with us in most of our roles, and we think of this as a principle across our company, is intense attention to detail and appreciation for why that matters because of all the things you and I have talked about already. And then the second thing that we look for is optimism. Someone very smart recently told me, you only need to be yay smart to be successful. You do need to have some amount of intelligence and ability to get strategy. But beyond that, it's all your habits, how you work, your ability to work with others, right? That allows you to succeed in this world. And when it comes to inventing, which is what we do at a young company, we are trying to invent something that other people haven't gone off and done already. So it's not a well understood behavior or use case. When you're inventing, you are 90% of the time going to be wrong when you build something, right? We're going to talk it out. We're going to have some idea. Hey, we should do this for our customers. Everyone is going to sign off. This sounds great. The data shows this was blah, blah, blah. And truly 9 out of 10 times you're like, we tanked the numbers, right? Like, this is terrible. Actually, now that we use it, this is what were we thinking? This is a horrible experience. And you have to be okay with that. And I think people who, my experience is there are people who can have, life can deal the same circumstances to two people. And one group of those people are galvanized and looking for solutions. And another group of people find it really hard to look past, the challenges in front of them. And what we try our best to do is find people who we call optimistic, who want to see the world become a better place, who think it's possible that they can be a part of that. And then have the work habits, the attention to detail. When you put those together, it's real. You can teach a lot of the rest of it.
Yeah, it's almost like attitude. It sounds like, right? Like you got to show up with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the other thing that happens is a lot of things are infectious. So once you have a team and a critical mass of people who work a certain way and talk a certain way and model the right behaviors, then you start adding people into that, and even things like attitude can become infectious, right? As long as you have the right starting conditions of
right.
people.
Okay. I don't want to discount your experience at Sosh, the company you founded, but I do want to ask a little bit about it. A couple of the questions that came to mind, and feel free to answer these, like whatever comes to mind, but I was curious about maybe the most important business lesson or two. I mean, this is a decent part of your career here, 4 years, I believe. I'm curious, sort of like the business lesson, but also like, what did you learn about yourself through that, I think the successful experience starting a company and getting it acquired?
Yeah. Okay. It's an interesting question.
So what did you learn career-wise or business-wise, important business lesson? And then like, what I'm more curious about is what did you learn about yourself through those 4 years?
Yeah, I think it's a bunch of stuff is coming to mind. So Sosh, the idea behind it was to help people find things locally. Okay. Historically hard problem. You live in Portland, I live in San Francisco. There's amazing stuff happening all around us. And like truly historically figuring out what all is happening and what of that is of interest to me is a challenging problem. We had a clever solution to that problem. We used augmented human intelligence. So we would take humans with great taste and use a bunch of computers and techniques with machine learning and things, and kind of combine the power of the two to be able to scale, in our minds, good taste, scale good taste.
Okay. Even so, I was wondering though, like even at that time, like Yelp was a big thing, right? Like when you started it anyways.
Yeah. So Yelp is kind of an index of places, if that makes sense, right? And so pins on maps is sort of a solved problem, actually. I think what's harder is this more ephemeral idea of things to do, which can be a messy taxonomy of things. There are places to go. That is one type of thing to do. There are also like, hey, there's this particular dish at this particular restaurant, the stracciatella at Roberta's Pizza in Brooklyn. Like, you got to go and have that thing. Because if you went and didn't have that thing, what a shame, right? Yeah. So there's like certain like things like that. There are obviously temporal events, there's a wine tasting with this amazing, brilliant winemaker, whatever. And then there's like a whole mess of other things. There's like hikes and that's like a guided path. It's like not a pin on a map. It's like a subset of a geography. And so there's this kind of messy taxonomy of things to do. And what had been a solved problem at the time was, where are things? Where are things? And then starting to call it 10 years ago, show me some pictures of those things and give me maybe what does the wide world have to say about those things? And what we found was there's still quite a bit of onus on the individual to say, within those places, what should I actually do? And which of these places is worth going to, and so on. And what we did is we recognized that there are there are people in like all of these cities who like people call, right? Like, hey, I have a date. I want to take someone on a date and blah, blah, blah. What should I do? And they go, oh, you should go have brunch at this place. Make sure you order the X, and then go do this hike, and then have coffee at the, like, Land's End. It's super
Okay.
cool. You can see the beach. And there's like a lot of ephemera in what I just like sort of described. It's like, do this on a Saturday that's sunny, and don't do this on a Saturday that's rainy, right? Or a Tuesday that's rainy. And so we said, because people can do this very fluidly, let's like try to understand how humans answer this question. And what we found was, when you take good people with good taste, they're actually doing a repeatable, scalable set of things. They're consulting the weather. They're looking at some of their favorite sources. They're taking out a map and saying, do these things physically make sense together? And how would you get from A to B? And where would you park? And blah, blah, blah. And we said we could not only learn from those grooved patterns, but also increase an individual who has good tastes throughput, number of things they can evaluate, by like 100 or 1,000x if we used a bunch of technology to parse the wide world, figure out what's happening where, when, what of that is interesting, try to combine that information, and then show it to somebody. And they would go, oh no, this place actually sucks because I've been there and it was terrible. Or that this place is actually amazing, but it's amazing for a reason you didn't pick out, because the chef worked at some famous restaurant or whatever. And, one of the things that we came to learn, by the way, at Sosh, was almost anybody can enjoy almost any experience with the right context and mindset. Okay. Almost anyone can have a bad time anywhere with the wrong context and mindset, right? You show up to a fancy restaurant and you're just not in the right mood, and you're like, oh, this is also overblown, and like, get me the hell out of here. This is not enough food. And you could complain your way. Versus if you went there and you actually saw a time lapse of that mural on the wall and the artist who made it, and you had a little bit of context of this person grew up in Normandy, France, and this is what the world they came from is, and then you sit and enjoy your meal, you might have a different experience. And so not only were we trying to build a messy taxonomy of things to do, not only were we trying to tell people, here are the ones that you should do, but we were actually merchandising them completely uniquely to each person based on the context and mindset that they needed to have a good experience. And so anyway, so that's what we did. Just a side.
Yeah, it's interesting as I'm hearing you talk about it. It sounds like you learned a lot about human behavior, which we'll talk about in a second. But
yeah, and I think we felt our way into an approach that actually informs a lot of what we do at Future, which is I believe that a lot, there's this quote that the future has already arrived, but it's not evenly distributed yet, right? That expertise is this amazing thing that very few people can access. Very few people can call up the person who knows everything about, art in Los Angeles and ask them, hey, what do you think I would like, for me? And some people can have access to that. And what we found was kind of humans plus technology creates this ability to scale humans. And so we at Sosh, we did that with finding things to do and accessing, a great curated take on what's happening in my city. At Future, we give you an expert who, maybe could help a discrete number of people in the real world, but using technology can help a lot more. And I think one of the things that I learned was that's a powerful approach, and I want to do a lot more of that throughout my career. The thing that I was going to say, though, was we solved this great consumer question, what should I do? But didn't actually at the time conceive holistically, like, how is this a self-sustaining business over 50 years? And so we'd actually send like hordes of people to these great experiences in the real world in the city. There'd be a line around the block, and we had no financial relationship with all these people in line. The purveyor, the local business, had no idea why they were blowing up, and we had no relationship there. And we were just this very cool recommendation engine. I think we were pushing the boundaries of what people had done, a decade ago. But part of our lesson, we got very lucky. This was a time when many companies were scaling local markets, whether it was Uber and Lyft or DoorDash and Postmates and many, many more, grocery delivery and so on. And all of these companies were launching market by market. And we had basically built this algorithmic machine to like decode markets and physical geographies and what's where and what matters and what are the traffic patterns and so on. And so we ended up, as you know, getting acquired by Postmates and spending time there and scaling that company up. But lesson was, kind of conceiving that whole plan thing we talked about. How is this not only a great consumer proposition, but a great business? That was our lesson. And, at the time, this was 2011, maybe. We were in one of those periods, which we just exited recently in tech, where people weren't really asking those hard questions. And it was a great lesson for us. The thing I learned about myself was that, you start a company, you build a great proposition, you scale it up, you sell it, it's acquired by someone, and you like kind of tie a bow in this chapter. And I remember some folks that we worked with were like, wow, I'm exhausted. That was a great ride. And like, but holy crap, I'm, tired. And my like instantaneous feeling was like, I want to do that again, and so, ended up working at Postmates for a while. I was an EIR. And then I started this company, and I called some of my friends and said, hey, I'm going to start another company. And a lot of them were like, are you crazy? You want to start back at, square one, take out the trash yourself, code, prototypes yourself, and like start over for something that you have, by the way, no idea if it will work or not, or be successful or not. Like, are you insane? And I think what I came to find was, for me, building something, inventing, whether I'm the founder or not, I can plug in and be a part of a creative process, is wholly engaging. It engages all of your physiology. Your brain is working hard, but you're also like on the hook. You're like physically sweating. You are stressed. You are engaged in every way when you are building something like that from the ground up. And for me, that feeling of like using the tools you have, like being maximally engaged, was something that I learned I love. And my wife makes fun of me because whenever we're walking through San Francisco is a very hilly town. And when we start walking uphill, she like kind of immediately starts complaining. I'm like, I love this. Isn't this great? We're walking up a hill. It's very like challenging and engaging. And she's like, you love walking up hills. That's like the thing in your life that you should know about yourself. So,
That's
so
funny.
I learned that I like to be engaged, maximum.
Yeah. There's a hill. So I live it's called Happy Valley. If you like hills, this is a great place to visit.
Yeah.
It's in the Portland metro, but there's a hill that I go to. It just looks like this. And I send it to my trainer. Like, I'll take a picture of it. And I'm like, all right, I'm not very fast. I can't run very far, but my goal is to just get to the top without stopping.
Yeah.
And if I haven't ran in a while, I stop a few times, but I just keep going. And there's like a stop sign, and I'll touch it like when I get to the top, and then I'll go. So maybe it's like, 3-4 miles total, but man, it kicks my butt every time.
Yeah.
Guaranteed.
And look, you're engaged when you're doing that. You feel every step, right? When you're
100%.
Yeah.
It was interesting because, like, just pivoting a little bit, I was thinking about some of the stuff I've heard you talk about, because, you could have kind of taken the easy route to like making money at Future. Like, oh, you sign up for a year, you get 10% off, or we'll use, I was thinking about this. Like, there was a period where I just skip workouts, and I'm like, why doesn't Future just send me a bot so my trainer doesn't have to text me? Right. But like, for whatever reason, you've decided to, I think you called it like stacking the deck, right? Like, no, you're going to pay monthly. And if you don't like it, then don't pay for it. Like, there's this level of transparency that I imagine investors are like, what are you doing? And you're like, no, like, this is the moment of truth. They're either going to like it or they're not. And we don't want to take advantage of anybody. And maybe the plans change later. But like, when I heard you say that, I thought like, wow, that's a pretty brilliant idea.
Yeah, I think, so this gets more to then why start a company at all, right? And I think if you want to start a company, and like, I don't know, I think I have a personal bent on this. My intention around starting a company is, this is a cool thing to be able to do because you have the possibility of touching millions of people, right? Maybe hundreds of millions, should you be lucky. And if you're going to do that, you need to have some firm ground to stand on, some foundation that's truly unique and interesting and valuable. And one of the things that I recognized about starting a company, I think after building my first company and selling it and so on, was I built a company. It didn't change the world, but we demonstrably proved or disproved a thesis. We had very clear thinking. We built this like really brilliant apparatus around trying to prove or disprove that. We came to some conclusions, and we did it the right way. We were honest with everyone we dealt with, and the world was like, we want more people like that. Can you come run this company and do this and invest in us and so on? And I think for me, it was being intentional and having high integrity, like sort of led to, good things happening. And so when we started this company, what we said is we don't want to sort of trick ourselves and inflate our numbers in the short term for, maybe ultimately long-term covering up, did we have a good idea here or not? And so in fact, what we did, you talked about stacking the deck, we sort of stacked the deck almost against ourselves, or in a way, a better way to put it, that was high signal. So what we thought was, look, the problem historically with fitness is that everybody picks up cool new routines and so on, whether it's a gym membership or you get a new workout plan or you get a treadmill in your house or whatever. And the problem historically is like nothing sticks over a lifetime, right? You get busy, you move, you have a job, you get married, you have kids, whatever. All these kind of changes to routine throw people off of a very fragile sort of regimen that they've put together for themselves. And so if we said the problem is nothing sticks, then what we want to solve for if we build something in this space is that it sticks. And if we sold you a year in advance, we would actually have very little signal of, are we doing the right things when you go through those? Sounds like you go through, you went through lull and your work got busy and then you came back and you started doing more and so on. Are we actually helping to solve this problem? Or did we sell you a year in advance and you're a nice guy and you don't want to write into customer support and complain and so on? And so it looks like we retained you. And so what we ended up doing was to say, we're not only going to charge you monthly, force you to pay us monthly, we're going to remind you monthly. We're going to remind you a month or a week before your first recurring charge. Like basically Amazon would never do this, right? Or Netflix would never do this. And if we can retain people through that, we really know we have something. And now we can feel very assured that like some foundation we have is like fantastic and remarkable and interesting. And then we can build on. But if you kind of rush through that, it's kind of a house of cards analogy in there somewhere, which is, then you're on a shaky foundation and you'll only find out later that you were really kind of tricking yourself. So that's why we did that particular thing at Future. And I think it belies a lot of our thinking around how we tried to build the company in pieces, in phases and stages.
I love that. It got me thinking a lot. I think you also said something like, it's optimized for like the minimal sort of KPIs. And I think it simplifies things and it makes it really powerful. Yeah. I'm wondering, like, what's the biggest misconception you think about Future?
The biggest misconception. It's a really interesting question. I'm not sure I spend a lot of time worrying about how people misunderstand you, because that is the job, we're going to be misunderstood for 5 to 10 years and then everyone's going to get it on the other side of that. Yeah. The biggest misconception about Future, I think like there's a small and like obvious one that's really interesting, which is a lot of people think that Future was conceived during the pandemic. Oh, everyone's stuck at home. Like, give me like a different alternative for working out. And one of the things that we see actually, so Future is about 5 years old. We started the company and said basically all the most successful people who manage their health, whether it's pro athletes or the Fortune 100 executives or A-list celebrities, all these people who have demands on their time, who want to, sort of perform at a high level, they all do the same thing. They get help. They get a personal trainer and a chef. It takes a village, it turns out, to live a healthy, thriving life. And then the rest of us are kind of left to try to do it on our own. We buy a few consumer products and we have to do all the thinking, planning, tracking, and like try to make it happen. And the end result is 80% of Americans don't move enough. That number hasn't changed in 30 years, and so on. And with Future, we said, hey, we want to take this idea of giving people help, and we want to to start with one aspect of your health, say in your movement, give you a personal trainer, do this in a more scalable way where it doesn't cost, $100 an hour, which makes it a 1% solution ever. It turns out my co-founder, Justin, was one of the creators of FaceTime and iMessage at Apple and worked on communications on iOS for 10 years and was like, actually, a lot of people's even real world relationships are built on messaging each other, in a constant fashion and sharing photos and doing all of that. Perhaps we can build intimacy and connection between two people, this way. So anyway, so this was sort of the concept, the idea, and where was I going with this? We were talking about.
I love the background though, like for anyone listening to this, of like what it's about, right? And I look at this from a couple perspectives. Like sometimes, I'll talk to like friends and stuff, and they're thinking about investing in something. The first thing they think about, right, is the bike or something, right? Or like, hey, what should you get? And like maybe something else comes to mind, and then I think, oh, there's this pretty cool thing. It's not cheap.
We'll get back to
right?
misconception. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. And so I do think like, okay, if someone's willing to invest in something, I do like put this as an option of like, this is something you should consider. One of the things I think for me personally with the Peloton is to your point, like there's no accountability.
Mm-hmm.
There's no real like boot camp, like 30-day, 60-day thing. So you're just kind of trying to maneuver around it. It's really optimized as a bike and not as a boot camp, right?
Yeah.
I liked Tempo. I thought, and I'm sure those guys doing some amazing things.
Yeah.
And then this becomes like an option. But I think at face value, you think, oh, okay, I'm going to pay this much, but like, it's not like I'm investing in equipment. So I do think there's a little bit of a misconception of like, no, like you can do this anywhere. Like you can get minimal stuff. If you just have P90X equipment that's been sitting around, you can probably build a plan.
Totally.
If
you have nothing, we can kick your butt, right?
Yeah,
totally. And to kind of get back to that, the biggest misconception was, hey, is this a thing that popped up, for people at home during the pandemic or whatnot? And, we talked about the derivation of this. This is actually decades long behavior that the people who are most successful get a coach. And we pre-pandemic were like, we need to democratize that. That is a huge answer. And what we saw, which is really interesting, is that the more modalities you try to manage, let's say you work in the office 2 days a week, you're at home 3 days a week. So a couple of days a week, you're at a gym, a couple of days a week, you're working out at home, 1 day a week, you want to run outside or something, I don't know how you would mix it. The more you have things to stack, actually, the more net useful it is to have a coach who manages across all these things. And by the way, you didn't get across town to that class today. That's okay. I'm going to give you a little 10-minute thing that you can do at home, and to be adaptable. And so I think that was the biggest misconception that, hey, is this something that popped up for just people at home? And the reality is it's actually more useful when you're out there in the wide world. We did a study with one of the major gym chains in the country and saw that when we gave their population of, thousands of their members got a future coach, 70% of those people started checking in more often at the physical gym because now there was someone sending the text in the morning, activating them. There's a bit of accountability overlaid, like you said. And not only are 70% of them actually like getting up and going out into that gym more often, each person was going, way more often, not just as a population, but each person was really climbing the number of things they were doing. And then, of course, additionally, on the days when they couldn't get in, they were actually still getting something in. It wasn't like, oh, I can't get across to the gym today, I'm just not going to work out. It was like, oh, maybe I can actually just do something for 10 or 15 minutes here at home. And so that adaptability, if you look at the arc of time, I think things are only in our lives getting more complex and diverse in terms of the places we are and the things we're trying to manage. And so having somebody kind of layered into your life to help you manage all of that is actually just kind of more and more useful over time.
It's the saying, right? You get what you focus on, right? And if you have someone helping you and holding you accountable, it's interesting. Do you see kind of the future of like having sleep experts and nutritionists and things like that? Do you see that kind of down the line?
Yeah, I think the way we really started the company was to recognize that consumer health in this country is a challenge. 75% of Americans are obese or overweight. Compare that with some of our peer nations where, In France and Italy, it's like 20%. In Japan, it's like 7%, right? And so we're at, 40% obesity, 75% overweight or obese, and those numbers are increasing. 40 to 60% of Americans have 1 to 2 chronic conditions they live with. The big picture in this country is we're spending more and more on our health, 20% of GDP, $4 trillion a year. And yet, oddly, quality of life measurably is going down over time, or stagnating or decreasing. And the question we had was, where are the drivers here? And what you come to find is there are many drivers. There's genetics, socioeconomics, there's a lot of different things. One massive input, one big component is our everyday behaviors. There's really 5 things you do on a daily basis that'll end up having a big impact, not only on how long you live, but how great all of those years can be. And those 5 things are how you move, how you eat, how you sleep, how you deal with stress or mental health. And the 5th one's a little more esoteric. It's whether or not you take your medications. Turns out Americans who are supposed to are horribly non-compliant at taking their meds. And so these 5 things, how you move, eat, sleep, deal with stress, whether or not you take your meds, in an obvious way, if you step back and think about it, compound over decades of behavior to send you in potentially very different directions, right? If you can just get yourself activated to move a few times a week and you do that for years on end, that's a really different outcome than if you don't do that. And what we found was these are not only big drivers. The average American consumer is roughly aware of these things. They know they should walk a little bit more, maybe eat slightly better. They spend a crazy amount of time and energy trying, right? Just in movement alone, Americans will spend $50, $100 billion a year trying to move more. It's become the great American experience to pick up gym, memberships and workout routines and get a piece of equipment at home and it turns into a coat hanger, and to try and to fail has actually become something that everybody has experienced. And so every year, the majority of Americans will pick up a workout routine and then 80% will fail, right? And then bless their hearts, the next January, majority are going to pick up another thing. This is the year I'm going to try, and they're going to keep that cycle going. What we found, like I said, was the people who have the most success get help. And so our intention, and they build a constellation of experts around them, right? And so with Future, what we found was one of the keystone core habits that you can help people with and successfully do from afar is movement. It's empirically measurable if you're doing it or not, right? I have an ability to kind of nowadays, strap something on you and see if you're running or if you're not running and how fast you're running and your mile times and elevation gains and so on. Your coach can really help you get to the top of that hill pretty conceivably, right? It's a pretty tractable problem. And so we started with that as our core and said, what if we could put someone in your life? And this is what's really unique about Future. We put someone in your life every single day to help you manage your health. There isn't another place really in the world where that happens. Right.
No, I think what you guys have kind of nailed is the trust factor, right? I think that's the human element that take every device I just mentioned or bike or treadmill. Yeah. You can walk into an Orange Theory or whatever class and, you're kind of in and out. You don't really even talk to the coach, right? It's too loud. Yeah. But that's, I think, the unique thing you can build off of in an organic way. Cause it's interesting, even in the gym membership model, they don't really care if you show up, right? Most gyms, it's actually better for their business model if you just pay for it and don't show up. Sure. So it's an interesting
right. And this is sort of radically the opposite of that. And you talked about the payment model is also radically the opposite of that. And I think that's the goal, is to help you by helping you take one aspect of your health and managing it with you and for you. We build a couple of things: good habits and trust. And like you said, that sort of comes through with a real human. And as we build trust, we may have the ability to say, hey, it looks like you're also struggling with, I don't know, sleep's a challenge.
Another thing you can track. Yeah.
How do we maybe plug someone in here to help you kind of create good habits? Turns out the kind of the whole ball game in sleep is having a bedtime routine. If you don't do that, you just will never sleep, enough and consistently. And so, it's an environment and a routine. And so what if we plug in someone to help you kind of think through that, find the right products for you, find the right, routine, keep you accountable to doing that. And once that is, a solved problem, maybe we start to think about, hey, how do I don't know, eat better? Or I just need someone to text me every day to take my meds, these are problems that we think we could start to solve over time.
Question for you. Is it possible to have the text thread into someone's SMS app versus the future app? Because it's, to me, it's like so easy to ignore the trainer. Like, don't open the app. Is that something that obviously you've thought about, but like, is that doable at some point?
We actually started that way. The coach was just in your messages app.
Really?
Yeah. And we ended up going to bringing them into the app. We didn't, we measured it pretty carefully and didn't perceive any differences in how often people were talking to their coach, how much they were saying, the response time from a customer or coach. But what we thought was powerful about creating a shared canvas within kind of the shared world of future was we could start to annotate and give you guys shared information. So if you do, let's say, miss a workout, we can create an object there and your coach can point up and say, well, hey, what the hell, Rishi, or hey, it happens to me too. Don't worry. I'm going to go ahead and put a new workout in. Or when you finish something, again, having something there that your coach can say, oh, wow, I'm proud of you. Like I can see what you did here. And having that shared canvas, felt like a richer experience. So that's what we ended up doing, although there's no right answer. And we're always integrating new information.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I want to be mindful of time. I think you've given me a lot here. I do want to ask, book recommendation. Is there one that has made a big impact on you that you often gift the most?
Yeah, there is one, but it has nothing to do with tech, nothing to do with health. And so one of the things to know about me is that I am a biography junkie. I'm like a history junkie. I find it super interesting to like read about the past and about smart people and about the decisions they made and like what a gift.
Maybe I'll send you this because someone recommended it to me, but it's extremely,
Washington.
it's
That's
extremely
Ron Chernow, right? Is that Ron
Yes.
Chernow? So what I was going to say is I started dabbling in reading some biographies and stuff. And then I heard Ron Chernow speak, and he said he was a struggling, I don't know, newspaper or magazine writer for some time. Not struggling, he was middling. He wasn't indispensable and incredible at it. And he started writing his first book. And I think it was Hamilton, right? And he gave the manuscript to his editor, and his editor was like, what the heck is this? This is like 1,000 pages. No one's going to read 1,000 pages. And he was like, oh, it's just how my brain works. I'm sorry. I did all this research and wrote it. And so they ended up publishing the book and becomes a New York Times bestseller, right? And then he wrote another book. At some point he writes Washington, New York Times bestseller. And he was like, what I came to realize is there's a type of person in this world for whom more information is better. And they don't want to just know what happened as the outcome of this meeting, but like, what was the psyche of all the parties coming into this meeting? And then they were in this room in like the historical, mural room, and they got together and they debated what, and then what was the outcome. And so what I've learned about myself is I'm one of those people. And therefore I don't go freely making a ton of recommendations to people to go read 1,000-page books. However, there is a book that I think resonates deeply and is really interesting. And it's called The American Story. It's written and actually recorded. It's actually worth listening to as an audiobook because it is a series of live interviews by David M. Rubenstein. He's the founder of the Carlyle Group, and he is a big philanthropic sort of force, especially around preserving American history. David Rubenstein, what he does in this book is he interviews, I think it's like 10 master historians around their core subject matter.
Oh, wow. Okay. So the Chernow
on Hamilton
Goodwin
and exactly about Lincoln, right? Team of Rivals was her book. I mean, she spent 10 years basically living with Lincoln is how she describes it, reading every letter he ever wrote, every letter he ever received, visiting every place he'd ever been, and then wrote this book. And the really brilliant thing about this book, The American Story, is in about an hour with each of these people, he walks through what was the thrust here of what you learned about John Adams, about with David McCullough, and about Hamilton with Ron Chernow and so on. And it gives you this kind of like bit of a preview of the immense, interesting amount of information locked inside of these books. And it, for me, galvanized me. It was a great thing to listen to. It was very enriching. You learn a lot. but B, it really galvanized me to then go pick up each one of those books and to like get into them with a bit of a prepared mind to tie it all back together of like, where is this story heading? And now let me dive into the details. So The American Story, David Rubenstein, it is a brilliant audiobook because he interviews all of these people at the Library of Congress. And it's a book you can feel good about because I think the proceeds go towards a program with the Library of Congress that helps with child literacy. So
super interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. You read the Wright brothers? You mentioned McCullough.
No, I haven't read the Wright brothers. So there's an unending number. Right now I'm working all through all the Walter Isaacson biographies. Nice. Yeah, I just did Da Vinci, which was really wonderful, and Einstein's coming up. I think I'm in the middle of that one. So
cool. Awesome. Hey, I want to be mindful of time. I think you've given me enough. It's been great meeting you. Love the product. Looking forward to putting this together.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And, feel free to edit and mash it all together. And then let me know if you need anything from me, man.